Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm sat across from a man who his senior year of high school was voted best hair and also most likely to eliminate a terrorist. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unkelbach, a man who always follows rule number one.
Look cool at all times.
I wanted to make sure you... So I did not tell Garrett what I was going to say because I never do, but I wanted to see if he would get rule number one right, and he did. So well done, G.
I told you. I taught you rule number one.
I wouldn't say you taught me. Well, yeah, I guess you did. You told me. I didn't know what it was. Anyways, but yeah, that's the thing.
Nick is alluding to a joke in the SEAL teams, and it's really like, it's a joke that we laugh at ourselves, but it's also a joke that the other special operations programs have about the SEAL teams.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a lot of the other like if Army Green Berets are impersonating Navy SEALs, they're going to put like a bunch of gel in their hair and put sunglasses on. But the unofficial Navy SEAL rule number one is look cool at all times.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want that?
Rule number two, don't get lost.
All right. Oh, I'd be out.
And rule number three, if you break rule number two, revert back to rule number one.
Boom. Just look cool.
Yeah.
As long as you're lost. All right, cool. Well, hey.
There is some truth in that. A lot of things, if you don't look cool doing it, you are probably doing it wrong.
There you go. Well, it's good to know, G, and I'm glad that you expanded on that so everybody can know what rule number one is. It's important. Now, one of the things I will say is if I'm talking fast, if I seem like my brain is scrambled a little bit, Garrett decided to surprise me with an introduction to a product known as Nose Slap, which sounds like a cool street name for illegal drugs. It's not. We would never even touch that or joke around about that. This is, Garrett texted me earlier today, and we put this
I bought it on Instagram, so it must be legal.
Must be true, yeah. We post this on our story. If you don't follow us on Instagram, this is the kind of fun you miss out on. G was like, hey, man, I got a surprise for us. And I was like, great. I got like new cameras for us to record things for the studio. I figured this is just going to be a great day for the podcast. Garrett's like, I got his smelling salts. I'm like, are you smelling salts? I thought he was going to have like a new sign for the podcast or something legit. And no, it turns out that we tried these smelling salts because neither of us had ever done that in life.
I've never tried them.
And I can tell you, you can feel them go up your nostrils. It was...
if you don't know what smelling salts are, it's basically ammonia that your brain has a reaction to.
Yeah, my brain had a reaction to it, all right. It was, it was sharp, and I'll just put it that way. So, yeah.
Where they're commonly used is in sports,
yes,
and especially in powerlifting. Like powerlifters before a big lift, before like they're going for their a PR, they will smell smelling salts right before they go get on the bar.
I get that now. I 100% agree or understand why they.
So we didn't do smelling salts before a big deadlift, but we did it right before the podcast.
Yeah. So this is just going to be the greatest podcast ever.
It's going to be a big lift.
Big lift. Now today's podcast is a big lift. G. It's on emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and we're getting into this because last week we mentioned it a little bit.
Yeah, you covered it in your story, and the week before we did friendship.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Going back to the week before that in friendship.
Yeah, and we kind of talked around it. We mentioned it. You mentioned it in your own story, and I think it's one of those things that people are aware of the term, but as always, it's one of those things that's kind of hiding in plain sight. It's like, yeah, I know emotional
If you're really
intelligence.
into personal growth and development, you may have read some books,
yes,
or heard people talk about this. But even prior to it being in there a couple of popular books, this is a topic and a category that you really want to have a deep understanding in.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into this right now because I got a very interesting example of this. But before we do, just to give you guys a little heads up, because the reason I said that I thought Garrett had got something cool for the podcast studio or something for the podcast, we are actively working to enhance.
If you liked seeing us on Instagram and seeing in the studio beforehand, I'll just say that there's going to be some more opportunities for things like that.
Indeed.
We've got some exciting new things coming to the podcast for all of you guys, and that's all we're going to say for now.
Yeah, just to interact and to just, to have a little bit more fun getting to know each other. Anyways, okay, so, G, do you know what your IQ is? I didn't ask you this. I'm wondering. I feel like you're the kind of guy that would know.
Yeah, I'll say this. People who talk about their IQ are not cool people.
Right. So do you know yours?
I might.
Whatever. Okay, anyways. So the smartest man alive is a guy named Christopher Langan, and he has an IQ of 195.
That's ridiculous.
Now, for comparison, Einstein's was 150.
Yeah.
Okay, for the record.
You're considered very smart if you're over 125, and I believe the genius mark is 135.
Right.
But people will also tell you that the numbers on the IQ scale are pretty arbitrary.
Right.
And especially in like the upper category, because it's a scale based upon a large piece of data of humans.
Right.
And so like when you get up into the upper category, there's not a lot of people
Right.
to compare to, so the numbers get kind of skewed.
Yeah, you can't grade on a curve if there's like 5 people.
Him being in the 190s just means like there ain't nobody like him.
Right. I mean, if Einstein was 150, I've never taken an IQ test. I remember I took like an online one that could not even remotely be considered legit years ago. And guess what? I'm a genius. Okay. So, anyways.
It was one of those quizzes that they, put spamware on your computer afterwards.
Yeah, dude, I bought a subscription afterwards. I never could get that money back.
Only $99 a week.
Yeah. To help me raise my IQ score, which I didn't realize you couldn't do that. Anyways.
Dang it.
None of that was true, by the way, besides the fact that I did take a test that was not official.
There actually is one category for the way they test most IQ tests. One of them is verbal knowledge, and you can just increase your vocabulary and raise your IQ score. But that's only a few points.
I feel like this is the nose slap talking because we're getting distracted. So back to Christopher Langan. So Christopher Langan with an IQ of 195. Okay, just so we've all been kids, and if you have kids, you'll understand why this is even more incredible. So
ridiculous.
He could speak at 6 months, learn to read at age 3, and I think this is not a sign of intelligence, but it was in the article. He questioned the existence of God by age 5. He got a perfect score on the SAT. Even though he fell asleep during the test.
Does it say what age he got a perfect score at?
It does not. But it said he could ace foreign language exams by skimming a textbook minutes before class. He loved to learn, study math, languages, and philosophy for hours on his own each day. Now, here's the horrible part. Christopher Langan grew up in a pretty rough family environment, and he was physically abused by a stepfather and just was genuinely pretty poor and grew up in a real environment of lack. So what has Christopher Langan spent his life doing? He is a bouncer in a bar.
I've seen some. I know about this guy because years ago I watched something about him on TV. I don't remember, one of those obscure TV channels. I watched something about him, and I remember that at that time he was a bouncer. Right, because I told you when we were researching this about this guy, I couldn't remember his name, but I remember one of the things they talked about on there. He's so smart. Like for a while, he had peers at some of the big universities that he would work with. And he was talking about in that, like, and he didn't mean it in like a degrading way. He is talking about these people who are, top in different categories at different universities. Like, they don't understand me. They can't keep up with me. Mm-hmm. And then he also he believes so much in some of his research that no one else can understand or relate to. Believes, and he's not one of those people that thinks he's really smart, but like he's actually just weird.
Yeah.
Right. Like, Christopher is a strange person, but he's been tested and is extremely intelligent. Some of the things that he studies, he writes them in a language that he wrote so that no one can understand his stuff, right? Like to protect it.
Wow. That's
not only is he, great at foreign language, he writes his own languages.
So what you said about the professors is interesting because he actually went to and dropped out of a few different colleges. And at one of them, at Montana State, he had a conflict with one of his teachers because it was an introductory calculus professor, and he asked him why he was teaching calculus in such a trivial way, and he was really rude to him, and it offended the professor. And so then they started going back and forth, and that led to him ending up in the dean's office. So why are we telling this? Well, this is about emotional intelligence, and clearly Christopher Langan is a man who has a very high IQ.
One of my favorite movies is Real Geniuses with Val Kilmer. Have you ever seen it?
No.
Well, great movie. Go watch. It's a great movie from the 80s. Great soundtrack as well. But in that movie, you have Val Kilmer is brilliantly smart, but he's also like very funny and relates to people and very likable, which is very rare for people of that level of intelligence. And most of the people that he's around in the movie that are in the same program with him, he's in this laser program, they're all nerds. Right. But he's like really cool and really funny.
Right.
But most people are not like that when you're at that level of intelligence.
And that's the point we're making. Like, emotional intelligence is very, very different to IQ, right? Yeah. You can be a genius, but you can just talk really well to your computer and nobody else. And look what happens. I mean, he's an unfortunate example, and I do actually feel really bad using him as the example, but it highlights a point of EQ and IQ have no correlation, really. They're really very separate things, and we've all heard of IQ. And
IQ is how smart you are.
Right.
But we know, I mean, we know in the world just being smart does not necessarily make you successful. Everybody knows a person that's wildly successful that you're like, man, that guy's not very smart, and he's so successful.
Yes.
And on the other end of that, you also know people who are like, man, that's one of the smartest people I know personally. and they're not very successful.
Yeah.
Right? Some smart people are successful. There's things that go along with that. And we're not just talking about success today, because a lot of people that even you can just be intelligent, right? Or you can not be intelligent and make a lot of money, but that still doesn't mean that you can live a great life, right? Because what emotional intelligence is, or your emotional quotient, very different than an intellectual quotient, is your ability to hear and see and understand emotions and process them, and really to understand other people. And so, a question that is just something for you to think about and that we're going to explore a little bit on this podcast is, would you rather have a higher IQ or a higher EQ?
Yeah. It's a good question, G. Well, let's get a few misconceptions about EQ out of the way, because I feel like IQ is pretty well known with EQ. So some of the misconceptions, and this is a really encouraging one. So if you're out there and you're like, maybe I don't relate to other people well. I struggle to have deep connection. I listened to your friendship podcast. It was great, but I don't know. I still don't.
Yeah, we mentioned it on there because EQ is such a big piece of relationships. I would tell you that this episode is for everybody. It's a great reminder for everybody, but I would say it's specifically for people who feel like they don't have deep relationships, because I will tell you, if you have deep relationships, if you actually have great intimacy with other people, whether that's a spouse or deep friendships, you have a level of emotional intelligence. You have to be able to connect and relate well with other people. So that's the first part about it, emotional intelligence. But let's jump into some of the other misconceptions.
Yeah, I think the misconception is, whereas IQ is fixed, I didn't actually know that, but they were saying your IQ is set, is literally your intelligence quotient, the max that you can get. Your EQ is not. EQ can be worked on, it can be improved. So that's really good news if you're a person out there that's like, hey, I struggle to really relate to people. Maybe my EQ isn't great. The good news is you can work on it. You can grow. Have a growth mindset about it.
I didn't have you pull this up, but there's been articles for a long time, Inc., Entrepreneur, Forbes, all of those, about EQ being a greater predictor of success than IQ. Because in almost every job category, in almost every industry, you have to interact with people.
Yeah.
Right. And some people who are the opposite, and we're just talking about the extremes because you can learn from them that way. If you've got the extreme high IQ person with low EQ, they just want to talk to their computer and not talk to anybody else. People who have a high EQ and at least a moderate level of IQ, they can solve problems, but they're also really good at interacting with other people and understanding other people, right? It's not just like in communication. Go back to our communication episode. It's not just that you can receive what someone says, but that you can understand it and communicate back with them. And so EQ is this great ability to communicate well with people's emotions, to understand what someone else is feeling, not just saying, and to be able, and it's not just like I can detect that someone's mad, right? I was saying to Nick, I think one of the great examples of EQ is how much people trust you.
Yeah. And you said, we were talking as well, this does not mean that you're a lot of people will say they're an empath, and what that means is that they just sort of mirror other people's emotions.
I don't love that word.
Well, yeah.
I don't love that word only because being an empath is important, but I think that word gets misused.
Yes.
Right. So, empathy is to feel someone else's feelings. And so a lot of people will describe themselves as an empath. And if you don't take this the wrong way. Maybe you meant it in a good understanding of the word empath. But I've seen people describe themselves as an empath, and that's really just an excuse for them being like a very high thermometer for what's going on. They're really upset because other people are upset. Yeah. Something terrible is going on. I'm going to cry about it too. I just feel other people's emotions. And we don't need more thermometers, right? And so being an empath in that way, being an empath is actually an incredible skill that you can feel other people's emotions. That doesn't mean that you feel other people's emotions and mirror or express it for them.
Right. It's being able to control it. And that actually leads to the definition. So we want to make sure to give you a working definition, and a great book. There's a book out there called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves. That's where we're getting this definition from.
You've read that one.
Yes.
Right, Nick? Yes. I haven't read that book. I read a book a few years back called Emotional Quotient, which is really writing about the same thing. They may even be the same authors. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I'm just referencing that because that's where we get the definition from. So emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use that awareness to manage your behavior and relationships.
Read it one more time.
I will. I knew you were going to say that. Your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships.
Yeah, so it's two things. what part one is, I can understand the emotions that I'm having, which literally think about like level one with your children. They're getting upset. And like one of the things that this is a specific technique, like with children, is to help them verbalize,
right,
like, I'm upset right now,
yes,
to know that, like, okay, that's detecting, like, I'm feeling emotions, but that doesn't mean I have to do those things, right? So level one is understanding your emotions, and then also understanding the emotions that someone else is having, like, that guy's really mad at me, right? But then it's the ability to do something with that.
Yeah, the term that you'll hear parents say all the time, and I've said it, is use your words, right?
Yeah.
That's what you tell a little toddler when they're like freaking out. You're like, use your words, and then they start telling you. And it's powerful.
But the more I feel these feelings, the less I want to use words.
The more I just want to smash stuff. And we get that. But we want you to be better than that. So
we don't want to be toddlers for forever.
Exactly. Now, we bring up the toddlers, and it's kind of a funny story, but really, like we referenced with James Lang or Christopher Langan, and it's really, like I said, it's unfortunate. I feel bad about it, but it's important to note, a lot of your emotional intelligence will be gathered from the time you're young. It will have to do with the environment that you grew up with. You'll see this all the time with people who grew up in homes that were non-expressive. Yeah. They're very uncomfortable expressing their emotions, and
homes that don't really express a lot of care or a lot of intimacy. You don't have deep conversations as a family.
Yes.
Maybe, these are families where you probably don't get a lot of hugs. You don't hear I love you. You don't have deep conversations, and you don't have conversations about uncomfortable topics.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And in a place like that, you're really going to become very muted to your emotions, because parents, and this is not meant to be a podcast on how to get therapy, but your parents are supposed to be people in your life that help you learn who you are,
right,
and help you mature and grow. And so you should, ideally, this is not the case for most people, but ideally, the people that you learn emotions from are people who will be honest with you, and that they care about you deeply.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you have people like that in your life, you learn how to understand your emotions, and also people like when you're being just a snot-nosed child, right? You have a parent who cares about you, loves you enough to help you see the way that you're being. I remember my dad would say to me when I was younger, I wish I'd had a camera so I could show you how you're acting right now, right? But he's not saying that like, I'm tired of you. He's saying that you need to see how you're being right now, right? A parents will help teach you awareness, which is this first part of EQ.
Yeah. And you talked about it being really like a heart issue as well. G, you talked about that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. So Proverbs 4:23, out of the heart flow the issues of life. I would say EQ. So EQ is an environment issue, but it's also a heart issue. And by heart issue, what I'll say is this, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into how to develop your EQ and how to grow it. But having the ability to understand others, or the ability to be aware of others' emotions, but then the ability to do something with it, it comes from at the core of the issue is care. Do you care about others?
Yeah.
Right. If you do not care about other people, you won't care about their emotions.
Right.
Right. Unless you literally are a sociopath. And that's, a very, very small percentage of the population. Unless you are a sociopath and you're like, man, I just want to understand these people so I can manipulate them.
Right.
And I want to abuse them.
Yeah.
Right. Like most people are not that way. And so what you learn how to understand people, just like a spouse or your children, like, I want to understand you. Right. We talked about that on the friendship podcast. One of the things that is makes you feel loved and have deep relationship with someone is to feel understood by them. Right. So when you care about someone, you'll want to understand them. So I say it that way, that referencing Proverbs 4:23, out of the heart flow the issues of life. If you care deeply about people, that'll allow you to, it'll help you in this process of, because one of the things you need to do to develop your EQ is regulate your own emotions and get them out of the way, because your emotions will always be louder than, by default, your emotions will be louder than other people's emotions. You have to turn down the volume on your own emotions, right? And if you don't care about others, and what you care most about you is, you're going to turn the dial on your emotions up to max. Everyone needs to understand what I'm feeling. Right. But when you care about other people, you'll turn that dial down and say, I care more about how you feel in this situation than I do. I want to understand you. And so that's why I say that care, or the heart, is also one of the core issues in EQ.
Yeah, that's so good, G. Now, some of the benefits of having EQ. I mean, I'm sure you can. People.
Well, one other thing. So it's environment. It's EQ is a heart issue. EQ is also a leadership issue, right? Because a leader walks into any room and says, how can I help?
Right.
A leader walks into a room and says, what do we need here to grow? A leader walks into a room and looks for problems to solve, right? And so if a leader is in any situation, he's saying, what's needed here, right? What's needed for the objective? What's needed here so people can experience the kingdom of God? What's needed here so this relationship can be healthy? What's needed here so this business can grow, right? And so if you're a leader in that sense, you're also going to look at EQ and say, man, well, most people are led by their feelings. And if I want to be a leader, I need to learn how to lead people's feelings, right? And so the first step is I'm going to lead my own emotions. And that gives an example for other people how to do the same thing. But also if I can understand their emotions and communicate with them well, that I can help them lead themselves as well and follow me.
Yeah. And you talked about awareness as being a real key part of this. And we talked about like over time, when you start to really develop your EQ, it moves to a place of perception.
Yeah.
Right?
So the first step is awareness, right? Like until someone, if you've never heard of EQ, you might not be aware of it. Until you buy a Ford Bronco, you're not very aware of
Right.
Ford Broncos, right? So awareness is just like things catch your eye. But that doesn't, you also have to have experience and a knowledge base to really understand things. I was talking to Nick, I made an example as we were pre-planning about like walking through the battlefield. And one of the things that they do with us on the battlefield is they teach you how to detect IEDs. Right? Like you could literally step on a mine and there's not a big circle. It's not Call of Duty. There's not a big circle on the ground that says mine on it. Don't step on this. Right? Because in Call of Duty, you step on a mine because you're not paying attention.
Right. IED, for the record, improvised explosive device for those that may not know that.
So on the battlefield, right, the mines are very well disguised.
Right.
And you have to know what they look like. I mean, it'll look like just a normal, Ozarka water bottle, but inside that water bottle is a little switch plate, right, that has a small wire out of it that you don't see because it's covered in sand that goes to, some sort of IED. And so until you've been trained to see those things, you can be very aware.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm paying attention. I'm looking for bombs. I'm looking for threats, but you don't know what they look like. Right. So through experience, through knowledge, through training and application, you're able to perceive things differently.
Yeah.
Right. And awareness is just paying attention. My eyes are open. I'm receiving knowledge. Perception is taking that awareness to a higher level where I can be effective with this knowledge.
Yeah. And you said this when, once again, Garrett just stares off into space and throws out these definitions sometimes when we're preparing and I write them down. You said you're giving meaning to information through experience. And that really does tell the story that it is a process. And like you said, it does take training. And
right. Like if you could see the same water bottle that I would see, right? And you're like, oh, look, a water bottle, I'll just kick it.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
Right. But because I have a different set of information and experience, I give a very different meaning to that water bottle. As you're about to kick it, I would pull you back and, like violently. And you're not, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just saved your life. You don't understand what that situation is. Right. So it is through experience. Right. And this is experience with emotions in a training environment. Right. In the same way that our EOD techs would teach, and this was like very serious when we were learning this stuff. Like workup and training is fun, like that, but then when you go into this mindset of like I'm just on defense all the time to not get blown up, there's not really anything exciting about that. You take that stuff very seriously. And so the same thing, like if you about your emotions, right? Like, okay, I've decided I want to grow my EQ and it's no longer about me. I'm going to put my training helmet on. I'm going to look at this scenario. And so the next time I'm in a difficult circumstance, the next time I'm in a conflict with somebody, the next time my emotions are high, I'm going to say, how do I learn from this experience? And I want to use this to grow in the future. And so when you start to turn the light on of emotional intelligence in your life, that's where you can turn awareness into perception.
Yeah. You know what I just thought of when you were talking about that for people that are looking at this? I think about people who laugh when they're uncomfortable. I'm sure we've all met people like this. And so something not good will be going on and this person will be laughing and you're like looking at them like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. And that is really just a lack of having the emotional intelligence to understand how to regulate that, right? And to be like, okay, this is what's happening inside me. I need to use my words or understand what's going on to have the awareness so it's not affecting the relationships of others. Because for some people, if it's something bad, something bad's happening,
I have to process my uncomfortable feelings out loud.
Right. Yeah. And that's what you're saying. But that's a common thing. I think that's something that everybody can relate to. And I just dawned on me right now. Now, I think you guys are getting what the benefits are of emotional intelligence. I hope you're grasping it. I mean, emotional intelligence will give you a better ability to connect and understand with other people. It'll increase your
I'll tell you,
influence.
it doesn't matter what role you're in, whether you own your own business, whether you work on, the product and engineering side in a business, whether you're in HR, whether you're in sales, whether you're in executive leadership, whether you're a parent, it does not matter where you are in life. Great EQ will help you. It helps you connect with others. It helps you understand them. It'll help you make the sale. It'll help you. I think this is one of the great things that EQ does. So many times in our life, like we play out conversations in our head, right? And say you're in a difficult conversation with somebody and you'll say something to them and they just stonewall you. They're not saying anything. And you're going to ask them, how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Right? That's at least what you want to know if you don't say it. Well, when you have great EQ, you don't have to ask those questions. Right? You can understand that. And also, you don't even have to, when you're having that conversation, and it's not like you should just sit around and chess match every conversation that you're going to have. That's not what I'm saying. But in a conversation, it'll also help you make sure, okay, how I don't have to think like, okay, how's this going to make this person feel? I know if I say this, it'll make them feel this way. I can already detect where they're at emotionally, right? I know if I add this ingredient to the mixture right now, here's what's going to happen, because I have a great knowledge of baking, and I know if I add too much of this ingredient, it's going to change the chemistry of what we've got here. So you're not having to say it. You're not just having to do things and hope for a good reaction, right? So many times in a difficult conversation, whether it's a sales conversation or a conflict or whatever it is, you're like, man, I hope I said the right thing. And when you have great EQ, you do have to be able to communicate clearly, right? Which is a separate skill set from EQ. But if you know how people feel and you know how they're going to respond and you have great communication skills, that's when you're most likely always going to get to the right reaction in a situation.
Yeah. And who wouldn't want that ability? I mean, that's a huge unlock for every area of your life. Now, we talk about emotions a lot, G. We recorded a podcast on equanimity, which is one of your favorite words.
I'd say a lot of times we talk about them in not a positive light. And
Correct.
Where we talk about them in not a positive light is people who are led emotionally. Right? We don't want to be emotionally led. But I do want to emphasize on this, and I know Nick probably wants to say something about this too. I do want to emphasize that emotions are a good thing. Very good. Emotions are not bad, right? Think about like the greatest moments in your life, the things that you remember. You remember your children being born. You remember that, that moment on a specific summer. You remember that first job. You remember, the first time you saw, a specific monument or something like that. You remember all these great things in your life. You also remember some of the worst things that happened to you. You remember, a friend or a parent or a spouse dying. You remember a certain car accident. You remember all these negative things in your life. And both the goods and the bads, there's a lot of deep emotion there.
Yes.
Right? Like in every great memory that you have in your past, there's a lot of emotion there. I doubt you have any memories that are your most significant memory that you were emotionally blank. And so emotions are a great part of our memory, but also think about the memories that you have in your life. That's your experiences. Like when you get to the end of your life, you're like, man, these were all the great moments that I got to have. And emotion adds value to those things. And so I just want to put it in that light, because so many times, especially when we're frustrated by other people who don't lead their emotions, we can get in this perspective or this mindset where we just look at emotions as a negative thing. We don't like them. We don't like people who can't lead their emotions. Just remember that emotions add to the great value of life, right? They give so much meaning to moments in your life. So don't look negatively at emotion. What you want is it's the same as people who are poor and have struggled with poverty and struggled with financial literacy, and they just don't like money. They don't like people with money, and they don't like money. That's a negative mindset about money. And you can have a negative mindset about emotions when you've been hurt emotionally, when you can't lead your own emotions, when you don't like other people who don't lead their emotions. And I just say, if you'll have great EQ and then you'll value emotions, you'll get so much more out of life.
Yeah. No, I do think it is interesting. I don't think we often ask these big picture questions. Like God gave us emotions.
That's
They're
right.
a God-given thing. Like, why did he do that? And I think
what we know is that God made us in his image.
Yes.
Right. And, a lot of the other creatures on the planet don't feel feelings the way that we do.
Right.
And so I think it allows us to give meaning to things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you get so much more of a deeper connection. I mean, you touched on it, creating anchors, both good and negative, or good and bad in your mentality. And it really is like it is the sweetest part of life it can be when they're managed well and whenever you have them under control. So I just think about that, and I think we are the most evolved of all the animals, and we are, quote unquote, top of the food chain. Not even quote unquote, we are top of the food chain. And I really do think that the emotional intelligence that we have and the fact that we have emotions allows that to happen. Now, I
just want to say one more thing about this. Like, one of the components of this podcast is, and you and I have talked about this at length so many times, one of the components of this podcast, and it's not just for this podcast, is how I feel about life. It's what I want for others. I want people to get the most out of life.
Yes.
I've gotten to have some incredible experience in my life, and I feel also like God has given me so much in my life, and I want others to live a great life. And I don't mean like I want you to be famous. I don't mean I want you to make a bunch of money, which all that stuff can be good, but I want everyone to live a great life and know that they can live a great life. And one of the things that'll help you live a great life, just like understanding financial literacy, because that's a part of life, right? If you never, doesn't mean you have to make a bunch of money, but if you don't ever understand how to manage money or how money works, like, it'll always be a pain point for you. And the same with your emotions. And I would say far more important even than financial literacy. If you'll learn how to manage your emotions, if you'll learn to have great EQ and develop yours, you will live a great life.
That's well said, G. Also, I'd like to point out, to completely break off from what we just said, that I think the nose slap is finally worn off. Like, I was genuinely feeling jittery. I had
mine didn't work very well.
Yeah.
So I got some of yours,
yeah.
And I'm sure the first hit was stronger than the second.
Yeah.
So you might have been feeling it a little bit more.
And I took the second one. So
yeah, you went back for more. If you didn't watch the video on Instagram and you're listening to this later, it's too late, because that's how. Stories
maybe
work.
we will throw it up there, because I did actually take the video on my phone, and it is pretty funny. But that heated my body.
Maybe repost it on Monday.
Yeah, it heated my body temperature up, and also I was struggling to focus for the first sort of 20 minutes of this. So great job. Anyways, so let's flash back, G, to something that people can relate to. Most people have probably worked with somebody that had a high IQ and a very low EQ. I hope for your sake that wasn't a boss, because if you did, you can probably think straight away of that person and be like, oh, guy was a terrible boss, right?
Yeah, and in almost every industry, there is a bad pattern of promoting people that are high performers into leadership and management positions.
Yeah. So we've both worked in IT at some points. I had a very early marketing role in an IT company, and I would talk to the engineers. And this is like the classic. I think they've made all sorts of jokes. I mean, what is it? The Big Bang Theory plays on this a lot, about these super smart guys who are kind of awkward to relate to. Well, there was a guy, this was over in the UK, that I worked with. We'll call him John. And John was very good at his job. He was an IT engineer. He would go out. You could send him to any place if there was like problem with the servers, networking, whatever. He would go and he could fix it. But like, he was probably the most awkward person I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
And like, you would walk in and you would say, "Hey, morning, John," and he would just be like, he would look at you like, and his eyes would start to get big, and he looked like there was some words that wanted to come out, but they just weren't forming on his mouth. And then he would just be like, "Hi," and he'd be like, oh, like, it was amazing how quickly things could turn awkward.
I think it's such a relatable story, and there's so much truth in that, because computers are based on a very different language than emotions.
Yes.
Emotions are oftentimes illogical.
Right.
And computers and IT are based on logic. And you have some people who have a very logical brain, and they look like people who are great at computers. They look at people and they say, "I do not understand how you work."
Yeah.
Right. And they'd rather talk to their computer.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have engineers. Anyways, I just thought
I could tell some of my first job out. I won't tell any stories, but my first job out of the military, I worked in IT managed services for a year and a half, and I have some of the exact same experiences.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, well, I just wanted to say that because I thought people could relate to that. But in case you are a person who has that, we're not making fun of you. Everybody can grow in their EQ. And if you're somebody that's like realizing, hey, I really need to increase this because I'm struggling to connect to people and I can relate to a lot of what you've described, great. We're going to get into how to grow your EQ. So we got 3 things. And then we also have some questions for yourself that you are to ask yourself. And then also, very interestingly, to find somebody that you're close to and ask them these questions. So, G, I'm going to kick us off. How to grow your EQ. What I will say, there's a lot of great books out there about this. Garrett and I are not trying to be EQ expert or emotional intelligence experts and try and give you like a 10-step plan. There's plenty of other people out there. There's great tests that you can assess yourself on. We wanted to introduce the subject, hopefully help you take a better mindset on it to understand that it can grow, that you have a growth mindset that is there to help you serve others, that your emotions are there to help you understand other people, not to be projected onto other people. and to now hopefully give you a few steps.
And some people have heard of this before, and it's just a good reminder for them.
Yes.
You've got a lot of, this is for some people who have so many great skills in life, and they naturally have a half dose of EQ, and maybe this is a skill that you need to spend some time in your personal growth and development on and sharpen it.
Right, and we're all about that. So number 1 on how to grow EQG is practice emotional generosity. Now
this comes from at the core of this is care, like I talked about earlier, right? If you want to have great EQ, which is the ability, is not just awareness but perception of your emotions of others. You can regulate your own emotions, and you know what to do with the emotions of others. You can help get to whatever the objective is, whether it's clear communication or working together or influencing another person. Like, it's the ability to use those emotions in that way. And to have that, to have EQ, to have the ability to do this, you need to be able to take yourself out of the picture, right? Because if everything's about you, and if the emotional experience in life is about you, you don't need to like understand other people's emotions. You just want to turn up your volume really loud. Right. You're the guy driving down the street with all his windows rolled down and huge subwoofers, and just, I want everyone to hear what I got going on in my life. Well, that's not emotional generosity. Emotional generosity is, hey, look, I'm going to turn down what I got going on. I want to hear you. How can I help you? How can I understand you better? That's emotional generosity, because emotions are energy, right? Like when you feel great emotions, it'll take some energy out of you. Sometimes it'll give you energy, but it'll also take some physical energy out of you. Might give you some mental energy. And so emotions are energy. So instead of like making people carry the weight of your emotions, why don't you step into a situation and say, how can I give you some energy? How can I give you some emotional energy?
Very simple filter to ask yourself, is my focus on them or on me? But it is a game changer. Very good. Number 2, G, do you want to give or do you want?
Yeah, number 2, be positive.
Shocker.
In every situation, right? Choose to be positive. But I'll say, like, you can have just like everything in life has the ability to be positively or negatively charged. And you can even have emotions of sadness. You can have emotions of remorse, and you can do them in a positive way or you can do them in a negative way. Choose not to have negative emotions. You can also feel like things that people would call a good emotion, and you can feel those in a negative way. And I would tell you the negative side of what would be a quote unquote good emotion is a selfish good emotion. Right. But I would say choose to be positive in every circumstance.
Yeah. How would you express what would be considered a negative emotion in a good way? Do you just mean like you have it under control as far it's not dictating to you? Well, I think people would think like anger and sadness would probably be thought of as like bad emotions. Quote unquote.
So what I don't want is an anger that's controlling me. I don't want an anger that most anger comes from entitlement, right? Like, you should have done this for me. This should have happened this way, and now I'm mad about it. But on the flip side of that, there is a positive form of anger in the same way that it talks about God's righteous anger. God had an anger for anything that was a gap in righteousness. Right? Like, this is not the kingdom. This is not God's way. And so where you can have a righteous anger in your own life is where when you see things that are wrong within yourself, right? Like, you immediately get, I wouldn't say triggered, but you have a strong immediate response to a situation. You say, this is not right, and I'm going to do something about it. Right? Like, I have a friend who I was talking to about anger, and he felt upset, like he was, I think I had the wrong response with my son. He has a young boy, and he saw his son looking at porn, and he wasn't mad at his son. He's mad at the situation. Right. He's mad that his son had been exposed to these things. And so he took very quick response, and he explained to me, and he told me everything that he did. And I said, no, that was a great response, right? Like, it wasn't taking it out on his son, but he had an immediate response to the situation because he understands that pornography is going to rob his son of life, right? And so that would tell you that's a positive type of anger. And so when you make emotions about you, there's a good tendency they're going to be negative. That's just one example of anger.
No, I just wanted to flesh that out because I think that could be misinterpreted. Number 3 on this, G, and this is one of your favorite subjects, is develop endurance.
Yeah, develop endurance. Well, this is something that we talk about a lot. We talk about this a lot more on Saturdays where Nick and I get to do Mighty Men together, but we talk about it on this podcast too. Endurance is, the way that it talks about it in the New Testament, is that ability to stay under the weight, right? To handle difficult situations. And so sometimes in your life, you're going to experience emotions that, like, this is hard, and I don't like this. This is very uncomfortable for me. And if you'll get good at dealing with the uncomfortable, then you'll be able to, in those difficult situations where someone's saying something that's making you really mad, when you're going through, when you're experiencing life that is forcing a certain set of emotions on you, if you've practiced endurance and you've developed it well, you can carry the heavy weight of that emotion and not burden everyone else around you. Like, hey, I can't carry this. You have to carry it for me.
Right.
I'm going to lash out. I'm going to vent. I'm going to do all of these things, right? It's because you haven't developed any endurance, right? God gives us things that are for us to grow, but we immediately say, God, take this from me. And then we throw it onto other people when God doesn't do it.
Right. Now, I think if you summed up all those steps that we just gave, it's really heading towards, like we said, with the goal of being able to turn down your own emotions so that you can turn up other people's and be there to serve them. I mean, that really is.
That's what it is at the core.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to these self-assessment questions because I think these are very interesting.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up with 3 questions. So we just gave you 3 ways to grow your EQ, right? Some really simple steps, and the fourth in subtext there is go read some books on EQ. But now we're gonna give you 3 questions to ask yourself, and 3 questions that you can ask some other people to help you grow your EQ.
Write these down if you really are the type of person that wants to go out there and test. Like I said, there is self-assessment tests. I'll see if I can find a link to the one that they reference in this book in particular and put it in the show notes. If not, though, here's 3 simple questions for yourself.
So first question, this is a question to ask yourself. Spend some time on it, journal on it, however you want to do that. Number 1, do I control my thoughts?
There's a lot that could be said about that because there's people that will say, well, you can't control your thoughts. You're right, but you can control what stays in your mind. That's the big difference when we're referencing that.
Question number 2, do I listen well to others? Oof. Right. This is a question for you. Man. You need to, and we'll talk about this in a second, but as my dad would always say, if the shoe fits, wear it. Well, no one's watching you try the shoe on. Right. You need to have some conversation with yourself and say, man, am I really a good listener? Think about the last 3 conversations that you had. Were you listening, waiting to respond? Or were you really, did you come into the conversation and say, I want to hear you?
Yeah, man. I think, I don't know, is anybody out there going to be like, dude, I crushed that 100%.
We can all grow in that.
I think that's one that really stings. Number 3 is, do I learn from negative feedback?
Yeah, different than just listening to other people to communicate with them. The last time somebody gave you negative feedback, did you just say, did you get defensive? Did you just bite your tongue? Or even better, did you actually hear them and say, man, maybe I need to grow?
Now, here's a little stinger for anybody else with that question number 3. If you read Proverbs a day, 1 proverb a day, which Garrett and I both do, and I hope you do, the amount of times in Proverbs it talks about fools will not listen to instruction, but the wise person will. And the wise person will learn from a rebuke of other, but a fool will not learn from 100 lashes on their own back. These are Proverbs, and these are all throughout all 31 chapters. If you are truly somebody who's wise, A, you're going to have some humility, and B, when someone comes to you with some negative feedback or with some correction, you're going to be grateful. And G, I got to honor you because you were really the person that modeled this so well for me. You say all the time that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And truthfully, I've watched you in scenarios in Mighty Men, in Hear What We Do with the podcast and everything that we do with Mindset Mastery. When we ask people for feedback, we really want that because we're not seeking to have people pat us on the back and tell us how great
the more you grow, you're like, what am I not seeing?
Yes.
Please tell me. And so that's the right heart to have in these questions, and that's the right heart to have in EQ, especially in a growth mindset with EQ, is really have the Socratic mindset of what do I not know?
Yeah.
Please, you're asking people you care about, please, can you tell me something about myself that I don't see?
Yeah, I got some feedback on you and interrupted me after the podcast. Anyways, let's go.
So now questions that you can ask other people. And I would ask these questions, not to just random people or a buddy, but at of the 3 or 5 people that are closest to you, maybe ask them 1 or 2 of these questions and find a way to ask all of these questions to the right people.
I'm picturing husbands and wives asking these to each other.
Sure. You can ask all of these questions to your spouse.
I promise you, asking your spouse will be the biggest. If you both agree to be honest and not have any hurt feelings, this is a huge opportunity for growth because these are not light dinner conversation questions. So go ahead, G. I love these.
Maybe start this at the beginning of a long dinner because it's going to be not going to be a short conversation. First question to ask other people. Number 1, do I keep my commitments?
Boom. And if you do, congratulations, you're disciplined.
And ask and don't ask in the do I keep my commitments?
Right.
You don't prompt them for the response. Ask this person in your life, hey, I would like some genuine feedback from you. The last few times I've made, because you can have a story that you tell yourself.
Yep.
right? Like, no, I do. No, ask them. The last 3 times that I made commitments to you, whether it was I'm going to take out the trash or it was some huge commitment.
Yeah.
You know, the last 3 times I've made commitments to you, did I keep them?
Yeah.
And do you feel like, and then here, this is the hard part, right? This is the really live up to it part. Maybe you even kept the last 3 commitments to a person, but they still don't feel like generally you keep your commitments. And maybe if you're keeping score, which you shouldn't, you can say like, no, I have in my journal that I've kept my commitments to you 79 out of, 84 times. Right. Like, but why does this person not feel like you keep commitments?
Yeah.
You should have the desire to understand that.
Seek to understand. Yeah. Well, question 2, if question 1's not enough for you, is how well do I handle my emotions?
Yeah.
You get to ask somebody close to you.
Yeah. And I will say, if you feel like, if you know you don't handle your emotions well, maybe it's not time to ask for feedback on this one. Maybe do the work you know you need to. But if you're at a place where you're like, man, I feel like I generally do, or I would really like this person's understanding and insight on this, that's ask this question. How well do I handle my emotions? Because maybe you think you do. Maybe you think you process your emotions really well, and this other person in your life will be like, oh man, every time this happens, I know about it. Every time you go through this, you make sure we all feel it.
And here's a great indicator. If the person tells you something and you immediately want to argue with them, probably not handling
Go
your
back
emotions.
to the question to yourself about handling negative feedback.
Exactly. All right, G, one more question.
Last question. This is a question you can ask any of the people close to you in your life and ask them, right? We asked you to ask yourself, but now it's the people around you. Am I a good listener? Right? Again, you may have a story you tell yourself like, oh man, I'm a great listener.
Yeah.
Well, find out what the people closest to you have to say.
Ooh, I feel like listening skills are something that everybody can learn and grow better at. So that one is probably not going to be 100 for anybody. So the challenge is to do the questions, guys. I don't think it's anything too
and the challenge is for those who don't, to change their mindset on emotions, that emotions are a gift from God.
Yes.
They're a positive thing when we choose to be positive, and they give us so much more meaning in our life.
Yeah.